Greetings. I'm Pastor Jim KOK from the Care Ministries of the Crystal Cathedral, and it is my privilege and my honor, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about care and kindness. It is such a needed commodity in our world. There is so much meanness and unfriendliness and carelessness that it is my passion to help you and other people to become inspired and motivated and enthused about a little bit more of care and kindness in everyday life. And for this first lesson, I'd like to just talk to you about some biblical texts which really are behind our whole project and program to inspire and motivate people to greater levels of care and kindness. You may remember that Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." Well, that is such a stunning pronouncement that Jesus gave us, because he also spoke of himself as the light of the world. He calls us the light of the world. Now, when you think of that, it means that whatever light there is in the world depends on us. And if there isn't a lot of light, maybe we can do more to brighten it. And that's what I'm hoping by talking to you, that everybody who hears this might decide to increase the intensity of their own involvement in this world so that the world gets a little bit brighter. Jesus said, let your light so shine that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So that's where it goes. If we are bright and brighter, God gets the glory and God gets the honor. One of the wonderful verses that really helps us in this is from 1 John 4, verse 7 to 12. This is a stunning verse. Let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Imagine that. That the extent to which we care for other people, the extent to which we are lights in the lives of other people, this is God in us flowing into the lives of other people. And it's not just ourselves, it is the Spirit of God in us, because God is love. And if God so loved us, this verse continues, we also ought to love one another. If we love one another, God abides in us. So that's such a wonderful announcement, that the extent to which we show love in this world is evidence that God is alive in us. And it is God who's coming through us. And so when we care for others, befriend others, and do acts of kindness, it is God coming through us. We are giving people tastes of God whenever we touch them with kindness and care. Well, there's another verse that I'd like to share with you. It's from Paul's epistle to the Romans, and he says, we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if. Now here's the littlest word there is the biggest word. He says, if we suffer with him. Well, I think most of us are not inclined to choose to suffer. And that word suffering can really be a big word in the lives of some people. But there's another interesting sense in which we can use that word suffer. Because we're told by St. Paul that we are joint heirs with Christ if we suffer with Christ. Well, whenever any person, whenever you put yourself out to help someone else, whether you make a call to somebody who's going through illness, if you visit someone who's had a death in the family, if you just say an extra word of appreciation to someone who serves you at a store. Whenever you do that and kind of put yourself out for someone else, that is a form of suffering for other people. It's a form of suffering for Christ. And so even though it is not highly painful, it is true that whenever we discomfort ourselves, when we move out of our comfort zone, we are acting in the way that Jesus wants us to act. So, I think many of us have always wanted to give to the Lord, make the world a better place, be considered by God as a faithful servant, and it is so easy to do if we just put our minds to it. If we just start seeing people and regarding them as folks who need a little bit of friendliness or care or cheer or loving kindness from us. Because Jesus said this, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. Well, that's what Jesus did in the maximum way. He actually died for us on the cross. But we are able to participate in that spirit when we put ourselves out, when we move out of our own comfort zone, to care and to be kind to another person. So that's part of what I really want to help you to see, that we have such an important assignment in life, being the light of the world. And one of the main qualities that you read of God in the whole Bible is captured in the word compassion. God is compassionate. And when we look at God, we see that one of the main things that God is actively showing us in all of Scripture and all of life is that God feels for us. That's what compassion means. The word compassion means to feel with. And sometimes when we are sick or lonely or grieving, we wonder where God is. Well, according to the Scriptures, we need to be reminded that the heart of God is compassion, that He is feeling with us, caring for us, feeling our pain. One of the great events of all history was when the children of Israel were in slavery in Egypt, and they were in misery. And it says in Exodus 2, the children groaned and they cried out, and their cry came up to God, and God remembered them. And later on it says, God speaking, I have surely seen the oppression of my people and have heard their cry, and I know their sorrows, so I have come down to deliver them. There you see the heart of God, caring for hurting people. And we are created in the image of God. So we are godlike. And so compassion is really a lively part of who we are too. And it is important that we don't kind of cloud it over or brush by it, but that we let this kind of spirit, the spirit of compassion, live in us, and that we are people who go through this life, go through this world, with hearts that are breaking for other people, and to some extent, reaching out to them in small ways and sometimes big ways. And so this is what Scripture calls us to be people of love. There's no word more powerful than love, because God is love, and the extent to which we show love is evidence of God living in us. So may God bless you and help you and all of us to grow in excitement and enthusiasm for giving care and kindness to everybody around us. Thank you for listening today. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you again this morning. Oops. And I'm talking to you to a great extent from this little book, The Miracle of Kindness, Changing the World One Act at a Time. And this is such an important book because we really believe that as we activate God's people and encourage them, that we are contributing in a very positive way to making the world a better place. So I hope that you will enter into this process and to this project with that attitude, that you want to be part of making this world a better place. And that's what Jesus calls us to do. A few years ago, I wrote a little book, the title of which is 90% of helping is just showing up. And I like that book, but I like the title of the book most of all, because it speaks so importantly of something about care that people need to keep in mind. And that is that when you walk into the room of somebody who's sick or grieving or lonely, 90% of the good stuff is your presence there. And sometimes we make excuses or find ways of staying out of those places because we're afraid, or we think we won't know what to say, or we think we need more training or more education. But most of the time it is not true, that the presence of a caring and loving person is in itself a very powerful, spirit-lifting, and helpful process. I talked to a man a while back who had gone through some very, very serious cancer treatment, and he had been in isolation for several weeks. He'd been there for a bone marrow transplant, and the isolation process was important to protect him from infection. And I asked him, where was God in this for you? In this difficult and painful and lonely process? And he stunned me by saying, God wasn't there. And then he added, until someone came to visit me. And that was such a powerful message, that he felt abandoned, alone. He did not feel or think of God being with him until a person came and showed him care and kindness and interest and love. And so that is such an important part of being a caring person, to not discount who you are, but to realize that 90% is in just showing up in some of these places. Well, as caring people, we are called to go into some hard places. There are places where we are needed to show up, where we badly want not to be. One wonderful example in the book, The Miracle of Kindness, is a friend of ours named Marilyn. And she said to me after she had read the little book, 90% of helping is just showing up, she said, "Oh, I wish I had never seen that book." And then she explained how she had heard that a woman who lived on her street had just come back from a visit to her son in another state. And while she was there visiting him, he completed suicide. And now she had come home after that very, very tragic event, and she, the mother, was down the street at her home. Well, Marilyn didn't know the woman that well, but she had this message in her heart: I have to go there. So she went down the street, knocked on the door, and the woman opened the door and fell into her arms, and they wept together. And sometime later, this woman told Marilyn that was one of the most helpful, healing events in my whole grief experience. And most of it was Marilyn showing up. It wasn't that she said something powerful or biblical or important, is that she was there and she opened her arms and they fell into tears together. So that's how important showing up is. And as God's caring people, we are called to notice those places. Sometimes they're in your neighborhood, where you hear that someone is going through a tough time. Maybe they've lost a job, or maybe their marriage isn't working well and they're separating. And you don't think you know what to say, but you know they are hurting. Those are places that God wants us to go. Go into those hard places. And we can be assured that it is true that the healing presence of God is coming through our love, and the love that we show is mostly that act of just being there. And that's part of dying for others, as we talked about in the first lesson. And we are called to do that sort of activity. That is what love is. Love is not primarily a feeling. You can't really claim that you have compassion or love for that woman down the street if you are able and not willing to go down there and say, I heard you're hurting and I care about you. That is what love is like. Love is action. And the interesting thing about dying for others in that form, if you will agree that that is a form of dying for others, it brings life to these people. It is life-giving. And so in our dying for others, through acts of loving kindness, we lift people back up into life. It is life-giving. And we will discover as we continue in this series that not only is it life-giving to them, but when we do those hard things, it is deeply gratifying and life-giving to us. So those are some of the hard places we need to go into. Recently I have been making weekly visits to a young couple whose teenage daughter suddenly dropped dead. Shauna, she was a cheerleader, and her heart stopped and they were not able to bring her back to life. Now, when I heard about this, I was aware that within myself, I was intimidated by the need that these people would have. I mean, there is nothing worse. There is nothing harder in life than to lose a child. And yet I knew that that's where I had to go. And I showed up, and they were so appreciative of my presence there. But those are the kind of places that are very, very hard, and God wants us to go into them. That's a form of dying for others. Well, then, in addition to that, there are lots of easy places to go that are so simple, so available, so natural. When you go to the grocery store, as God's people, we are not to think of ourselves as going there just to buy tomatoes and bananas and bread. We are there to notice people and to find ways to befriend them, to make eye contact, to give them words of encouragement or appreciation. When we go out the checkout lane, we need to give a gift to the cashier, a gift of appreciation, a smile. It is such a spirit-lifting thing to give loving kindness, even if it is in the form of just a pat on the back or friendliness or a smile. We are called to do that. And if you've been a person who tends not to smile much, you can start smiling more. Every one of us has been healed walking somewhere and some stranger smiled to us and greeted us, and it lifts our spirits. And this is what everybody can do. It is not going into a hard place, it's going into an easy place. And everyone can do it. So may God bless you and inspire you and motivate you as you go into hard places and sprinkle and spread the love of Jesus in the easy places every day. Thank you. Talk to you later. Greetings. It's great to be with you again today. And I have a little bit more to add to our lessons on care and kindness. In the book, The Miracle of Kindness, which I've introduced you to before, there is a chapter, the second chapter, which is entitled 5 Key Essentials to Encourage and Motivate. And I wanted to share with you what these 5 key essentials are. The first one is this, that everybody needs encouragement, appreciation, and help that affirms their spirit. Everybody needs that. There is nobody so rich, so famous, so intelligent or beautiful or handsome that they do not need gifts from us, gifts from you, of care and kindness in the form of encouragement and appreciation. So this is the first key, that when you go to a concert, to a lecture, when you go to church on Sunday, or when you go to a piano recital, no matter what function you go to, when you go to a bank or a car wash, or you go to the grocery store, the people who serve you are candidates for gifts from you. They are all needed. They are all needy, because we are all the walking wounded. It's easy to see some people, if they're in a wheelchair or they have conspicuous disabilities, but the fact is that every human being carries with them discouragement, loneliness, and confusion about life. And so that every person is a candidate for what you can give them. I like the story that I read about Luciano Pavarotti, the great tenor. It said that he carried in his wallet a clipping out of a newspaper. And this little clipping had especially heartwarming words of encouragement for his gifts of singing. And that often before a concert, he would take this little slip of paper out of his wallet and read it to encourage himself, to make him feel like, okay, I can do this. Now, that's just such a powerful example, because who's more gifted than Luciano Pavarotti? And yet he would reach into the newspaper for a clipping to encourage himself. So that's principle number one. Everybody needs it. The second principle is that everybody has something to give. There is no one who is disqualified. No matter who you are, you cannot discount yourself and say, mine doesn't count. Every one of us has been encouraged by the hug and the smile of a person with Down syndrome. They run up to you, they remember you, and their attitude cheers you. So there is no person who is lacking in the good stuff that helps other people, the encouragement, the appreciation, a smile, a pat on the back, any kind of way in which you can say to someone, you're a good person, you do a good job, I like you, I appreciate you. Everybody needs it, and everybody is able to give it. Everybody has something to give. So please remember both of those. Everybody needs it, and you have something to give. Everybody. There isn't a person. I mean, if you happen to meet the President of the United States and you were a 7-year-old child and you said, you're a great president, that president would be lifted by the words of a 7-year-old. Okay, the third principle in this, of these 5, is this: that when you give words of encouragement to someone, when you give words of appreciation, let's say you are going through the line at the supermarket, and you decide to say to the cashier, I really appreciate you. I really like the way you work. When you say words like that, you are planting hope in their heart. You are giving them a message that there's more than meanness in this world. There's more than selfishness and greediness. There's goodness. There are good people, and there is goodness in other people. And that is hope. That is hope building in the heart of any person you give encouragement to. It gives them the sense that there is goodness in this world. And if there's goodness, there's Godness, because God is good and goodness comes from God. So whenever you encourage someone, you're not only building hope and helping them to see there's goodness in this world, you're giving them a taste of God. And that's what everybody needs. There's no one who doesn't need that. The fourth principle, the fourth key of these 5 is this. Jesus said, "Inasmuch as you do it to the least of one of these little ones, you do it to me." So, to whomever we give encouragement, to whomever we give love, appreciation, show care and kindness, we are giving it to the Lord Jesus himself. Now what this means is that every human being, Jesus Christ identifies with them totally. Every human being. Jesus Christ loves them and cherishes them totally. And you and I can't really do that completely. There are people we have difficulty relating to. There's people that just don't feel right about, and so we can't do it to everybody. But when we do, to the most difficult people, we must remember that these people are treasured and valued and loved by the Lord, totally. And that is an extra way to motivate ourselves to reach out to people wherever we go. And the fifth key of these 5 is this, that loving kindness is infectious. When you give an act of graciousness and mercy and kindness to another person, it is absolutely certain that you infect them with it and that they give it to others. It happened to me just this morning on the freeway when I was coming in. I let someone in who I thought was kind of crowding in where they shouldn't. I let them in, and in 2 minutes or less, I noticed them let somebody in front of them. This is how infectious loving kindness really is. And I just wanted to share something about smiling that's in this book, because as you have noticed in your own life, when you smile at someone, they always smile back. And there's a little poem in here that talks about smiling, which really captures this idea that it's infectious. When someone smiled at me today, I started smiling too. I passed around the corner and someone saw my grin. When he smiled, I realized I'd passed it on to him. I thought about that smile. Then I realized its worth. A single smile just like mine could travel round the earth. So if you feel a smile begin, don't leave it undetected. Let's start an epidemic quick and get the world infected. And that goes for all of the loving kindness and care that we do, that we give to others, we are infecting the world, and the world really needs what we have, what you have. No one is disqualified. You are an ambassador of Jesus. Thank you. Talk to you later. Good morning. It's a great honor for me to be talking to you today again and sharing with you some ideas about being a caring person and spreading the light of Christ in this world through acts of care and kindness. Sometimes people make it more complicated than they need to. And so I'd like to share with you a few ideas that illustrate how simple it is to be the light of the world and make the lives of other people brighter in ways that you certainly are capable. Some months ago, I had a meeting in my office, and a woman came in, and she said she had been early to the meeting, and so she had just stayed in her car and read the book that she had with her. Then another car pulled up next to her. She turned and looked, and there was a woman in that car alone. And so my friend smiled at her and then went back to reading. A few minutes later, there was a knock at her window, and there the lady stood. She rolled down her window, and the lady said, "I just want to thank you for smiling at me. I've had a hard day, and your smile just lifted a lot of the cares and worries from my heart. It was so healing." So that's an example that everyone is capable of participating in, just giving people smiles. And smiles have a magic way of lifting people's spirits and healing some of the hurts and worries. A while back I was in Chicago, and I had rented a car, and after picking it up and getting the papers, I was approaching the exit where I had to stop one last time to show the papers to the man. He looked at the papers and handed them back to me. And he said, "Have a blessed day." I was so surprised, and my heart was so warmed by those words that he gave to me. He gave me a gift. He didn't have to say anything. He just was doing his job, but he went above and beyond his normal duties, and from somewhere in his heart or in his training or in his expectation of what he should give to people, he handed out blessings, and I got one. So it's very simple. It just takes thoughtfulness. There's a man on the block where I live who leaves the soda pop and water bottles in a sack by the curb every day. He is aware that there's a homeless man that comes by to look for such things, to help him get a little money to find food and whatever he needs. And so that man makes an effort to just leave those empty containers for that needy person. One of the shocking stories I heard a few years ago really helped me wake up to the needs of followers of Jesus to be more conscientious about care and kindness. This story was told me by a pastor, and he said that he and his wife have several friends who are single mothers who make a living as waitresses in restaurants. And he said in a conversation with a couple of them, they told him how much they disliked working on Sunday. Well, I thought he was going to say because they wanted to go to church. But instead he said, no, they worked at a particular restaurant, and nearby was a large church. And on Sunday noon, many people from that large church came to eat at their restaurant. And then they said the clincher, why they disliked working on Sunday. They said the church people, of all people, were the most demanding, the most rude, and the chintziest tippers. I couldn't believe what I heard, but they said it was true. He said it was a very true story that his friends had told him. What an impression these people from the church were making. The waitresses knew where they came from, and so they knew exactly who they were. That story really impressed on me the necessity of talking to followers of Jesus, that we become more hyper vigilant in our everyday work and everyday walk to sprinkle and spread kindness and care everywhere we go. So in talking with you on this subject, I want to give you some information, but I hope also it will eventuate in transformation. We all need to be transformed, to be sensitive and conscientious and aware of the opportunities we have, small, simple ways to make the world a better place and to show people that God's followers are working hard to make the world a better place and that we care for people. So the second story that I heard that really distressed me was when a mother told me that she had brought her child, who was a child with Down syndrome, to the church nursery on Sunday morning. And to her dismay, the other mothers who were present, kind of oohing and eyeing over the other babies, stayed away from her and stayed away from her baby. It was as if they had noticed and they didn't know what to say. It's not that they were mean people or bad people. It was just that they felt that they wouldn't know exactly what to say, I guess. And so they added a hurt to this woman's life by neglecting to come over and surround her with support and love. That was the second story that really inspired me to speak to God's people about working harder on care and kindness. One of my friends told me a story about backing out of his driveway, and a new neighbor had been walking by, and he waved to her. Okay? He knew she was from a distant country and did not speak English, but he waved to her. The next day, after he had backed out of the driveway, there she was again on her morning walk, and he waved to her. No response. On the third day, he noticed her sitting at the corner when he drove past, and he waved to her. And then he noticed as he turned the corner and looked in his rearview mirror, she got up and left after he had turned the corner and waved to her. And several times in the coming days, he noticed that same thing. She was waiting for him to wave to her. It was like in her loneliness, that simple act really blessed her soul and broke through her loneliness. Many of you know the name Marilyn Monroe. And she said, she was asked one time, in all those foster homes in which you grew up, did anyone ever show you love? And she said, yes, once. When the foster mother was powdering her nose, she patted me on the nose with her powder puff. She said, that was an act of love, one of the few that I received. So showing love and making this world a better place is really simple. Jesus said, your faith can be like a mustard seed. So things can start so small and grow into something big. So there's so much that we can do. And it doesn't have to be grandiose or fantastic, just simple acts of care and kindness, and they will grow into something very big, brightening the world for Jesus' sake. Thank you. Greetings, my friends. It's great to be with you again this morning, and I am happy to talk to you today about some of the ideas of being a good listener. In a future lesson, I'll talk in more detail, but I want to say some general principles that I think are important that you can use. And most of these are taken from the book, my book, The Miracle of Kindness, Changing the World One Act at a Time, which I hope you will consult because it's in detail there. But when we talk about listening, we're really talking about something which is really basic to being a caring person. It is hard to be a caring person if you can't listen to people. If you are, by nature, just a talker. Talking is important and wonderful and helpful and enjoyable, but to be a caring person, we need to be able to put our own conversing skills on hold and hear what people have to say. But really, what listening, good listening is about, it's about helping another person to talk. So that when you listen well, you say words that encourage the other one to keep sharing what's in their heart and what's in their mind. So if we can think of listening that way, that it's really wrapped up with responding to people. It is helping facilitate another person to talk. To be a caring person really means that we are able to take an interest in their story. And to be interested in people's stories is a real blessing because people are so interesting. One of the other main principles that we need to remember when we are trying to be a caring listener is that we pay attention to their feelings. We listen for their feelings more than for information. The information is important in some ways, but when people are hurting, or if we want to pick up on the distresses or fears or worries in their life, we need to pay attention to their feelings, their emotions. I like to say we listen to people, and our third ear tunes into their feelings. Our other ears hear the facts, the information, but the third ear is always tuned in to their feelings. For example, if a person says to you, "My grandma died today," she is giving you important information, but it's your third ear that hears sadness. She didn't say she was sad. She just told you that her grandma died. But your third ear hears sadness, grief. And so when you respond to that information, it usually is most satisfying to the person if you respond to the hurt, the sadness, the grief, with words like, "Oh, that's got to be hard for you," or "Oh, that's sad." Some way you communicate to them that you have tuned in and accept their feelings of sadness. When we tune into someone's feelings, we are more likely to connect with them as persons than if we just stay on the information level. The information is important, but we connect with people as persons when we hear and respond and acknowledge their feelings. So that's one of the principles that we will talk about in greater depth another time, but it means that we value people's feelings and we accept people's feelings. We do not discourage their feelings. We do not try to talk them out of their feelings. We are appreciating them as feeling people, and we believe that as they talk about their feelings, they feel better, that they share them with you. It lifts their hearts and lifts their spirits. Sometimes, of course, that means that when we tune into someone's feelings, like if you say to the woman who said, "My grandma died today," and you say, "Oh, that is sad," she might tear up. Tears might come to her eyes. One of the listening principles that we need to know is that when a person shows tears, begins to cry, something good is happening, not something bad. And so we don't try to close it off or close it down or run away from it. We may reach out to them with a hug, or we may say some more words that show that we accept their tears. Sometimes we cry with them, because sometimes one person's tears make tears come to our eyes. And we need to be comfortable with that and to really be thankful for tears rather than regard them as something unwanted. One of the principles of being a good listener that I'd like to remind you of at this point is that we are not there to fix people. We're there to hear them, to share with them, to walk with them, both figuratively or literally, and to allow them to talk about their feelings. But we should not have in our mind the idea that I've got to now fix them if something is hurt or broken or in distress. Leave the fixing to God. God does heal people. God heals the brokenhearted, and He heals people who are sad. But He expects us to be there for them, to reach out and touch them literally, and to put our arms around them and to let them talk. One of the ways that we sometimes help a person who is hurting is to name the issue that we think is going on in them. Now, I like to call this naming the elephant. It's a familiar expression in our society, and it really means that you talk about something that both of you know is there, and yet sometimes you're reluctant or fearful to talk about. Let me give you an example. I had a class with a group of people a couple of years ago, and one day Bill came in, and he had bruises and injuries on his face. He really looked beat up. And I said to him, "Bill, what happened to you?" He said, "Well, I slipped on the rocks at Newport Beach and fell on my face." And I said to him, "It looks like this happened several days ago," because it was already starting to heal up. He said, "Yes, it happened a week ago." But he said, "You know what? You're the first person who asked me what happened." I was astounded. And it really puzzled me, because it was so obvious, and yet he'd been among people and no one had asked him, "Bill, what happened?" Well, that's an example of naming the elephant. I don't know why people avoided it. Maybe they thought his wife had beat him up or something and didn't dare say it. But it was such an easy thing to say, and it needed to be said. So naming the elephant is one of the things that we need to be willing to do. One of the places that this is most often appreciated is with someone who has just lost a loved one through death or through divorce. And those people want to talk about the person who has died. And yet most people avoid the subject. So you meet Anne, and you know her husband died recently, and it's easy to get into just little superficial chatter about the weather or sports or clothing or something. And yet both of you are thinking of the fact that her husband died a short time ago. That's a perfect time to show caring by bringing up her loss. Just a simple question. How has it been since your husband died? Or a little statement, you know, we all miss Bill since he left us to go to Jesus. You bring it up, you introduce the subject, and inevitably they overflow with conversation because they've been waiting for someone to bring up the subject that is biggest in their heart and that they need to share. And it's such a healing thing. So take those little risks. Doesn't always work, but most of the time God's people are ready, willing, and able to open up if we just ask, "How you doing?" and name the elephant. Okay? Thank you for listening, and I hope your life will continue to be blessed, and I'll talk to you again later. Thank you. Greetings, my friends. It's great to be with you again today, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact that people are spiritual, not just physical. We are created by God as physical, spiritual entities. And these two qualities are so intertwined that you can't affect one without affecting the other. And in the care and kindness concept, we are primarily trying to help you to see that a kind act, a caring word, or any care you do to another person is a spiritual gift, and it touches a person's heart, and that actually impacts them physically. There's a proverb in the Old Testament that says, kind words are like honey, sweet to the taste and good for your health. Imagine that. Kind words are good for your health. Now that was 2,000 years ago that they claimed that. Today it is a measurable reality. They have found that if you speak kind words to a person and they do a blood test on that person, their hemoglobin is actually raised. They are healthier. They are physically healthier after a kind word. So the kind words don't just go in their ears and stay in their head, but they affect the whole body. The bodily functions are touched and affected by kindness that we give to people. So that's such a very exciting and important thing that we realize as we talk about care and kindness, that a kind act is a spiritual act, that we are not doing something different from what we would do if we talk to them directly about God. You talk about God, you are giving spiritual gifts. But when you give kindness and consideration, when you make a call on someone, when you pat somebody on the back, this too is spiritual. And as we talked about earlier, God is love, and this is love, and this is God coming from us into other people. And it's blessing them and helping them spiritually and physically. All creatures are helped by love. I think there's been some quaint and interesting experiments that affect plants and pets, where they measure the health and well-being of these living beings and find that care and even kind words benefits them physically. And so we need to see people as spiritual. We need to see that they are not just physical beings, and that when we connect to them, God is coming through us to help them and to heal them. And so when we go to the hospital to visit someone who is sick, we are part of the healing team. People get better more smoothly when friends care about them, when people pray for them, when visits are made and cards are sent. These are spirit-touching commodities. And those spirit-touching commodities affect the physical being. Many years ago, there was a study that was done in a cardiac care hospital. And these people who were studied were seriously ill with heart problems. And they were all connected to machines and EKGs and so forth. And a research person noticed that there were little islands of health in many people's printouts of their EKG strip. And at those points, they were puzzled why that person's heart beat healthfully during that period of time. Well, then they did some careful examination to find out what was going on in that person's life, in that hospital unit, at the point where the heart seemed to be normalized. And to their surprise, in each case, it was when a nurse or an attendant was helping the person, laying their hands on them and changing bandages or fixing the bed or straightening them up, but there was personal contact. And during those minutes of personal contact, the heart beat normally. I'd like to share a story that I read recently. It's really quite remarkable. And it's about a man who was a Spanish explorer in the 16th century. His name was Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. And he was the only survivor of a shipwreck in the Gulf of Mexico long ago. And a Gulf Coast tribe of indigenous Mexicans rescued him and brought him into their village. They were a sad group of people, victims of drought and famine, and many of them very diseased. Núñez, of course, had nothing to give them to help them. All he had gone down with the ship, and he didn't even have an education about helping sick folk, much less any medicine. All he had was himself and prayer. But to his amazement, in giving them his loving, faithful attention and care and touch, he began to see those Mexican people getting well and healed. They began telling him they were well. And he realized, as he said, I was far more than I thought I was. So that's what we're trying to stress, that each of us has an obligation and a responsibility and an opportunity to be actively part of lifting people's spirits, and in the process, their whole body is affected. Some of you remember the story of Norman Cousins. Norman Cousins had an illness that he learned was terminal. And he decided that that illness had come on to him because he had been through some very stressful and negative circumstances. So when he arranged for conventional medical care from the physicians, he also added something very surprising. He negotiated with someone to come in for a couple hours every day and show him funny videos, candid camera, and others that really tickled his funny bone. So every day for a couple hours he would laugh. And to the amazement of everybody, after he laughed for a couple hours, his body was measurably healthier. And he overcame that illness. He beat that unbeatable illness by resorting to spirit-lifting commodities called laughter. And that was just such a powerful example that we are spiritual beings. And the extent to which we reach out to each other, care for each other, maintain our friendships, we are actually in the process of taking care of each other and taking care of ourselves, because we are this physical, spiritual unity. And that which hurts us spiritually, hurts us physically. And the other way around too. When we get hurt physically, we get spiritually discouraged. And so we need a constant diet of helpful, loving kindness that we give to the people around us. And each one of us has that to offer. There's no one who's disqualified. There's no one who doesn't have it. There's no one who doesn't have a smile to share, or ears to listen, or a voice of encouragement. We are all part of God's God's party to heal and to help each other. So thank you for being part of that. And I'll talk to you again later. It's great to be with you again today. And I'd like to share with you some ideas that may help you to be increasingly active and motivated and confident in your life as a person who is caring for others and showing kindness every day, everywhere, toward people you meet. The first one is this. Jesus prayed, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." No doubt you've heard those words in the prayer that we call the Lord's Prayer. That little section, I believe, defines what our lives are about. That we are here on this earth, and we have a purpose, and it is to do what Jesus himself came to do. That is to increase the goodness and the justice and the mercy and the kindness and care in this world. You remember those words, "May your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." We are here to let our lights shine more brightly so that goodness increases here. Whereas Jesus is referring to the perfect goodness in heaven. Our lives here are to make a little bit better this planet on which we live. So that's what it's about. Living our lives to bring the kingdom. The kingdom is the Spirit of Jesus, the love of God into this world, into the lives of people around us. Now the second point is this. It's Sunday, but Monday is coming. Now long ago there was a sermon that a famous speaker talked about called "It's Friday, but Sunday is coming." That sermon was about Holy Week, Good Friday, and Easter. And whereas it referred to the fact that Good Friday is a pretty dark day, nevertheless, it was connected to the brightness of the resurrection on Easter. It's Friday, but Sunday is coming. Well, in our lives as Christians, I'd like to add a sequel to that sermon. And mine is, it's Sunday, but Monday is coming. Sunday is the day of refreshment, of getting refocused, reminded, rested, and doing whatever we can to be brought back into the awareness that our lives here are supposed to be dedicated to making this world a better place. So that Sunday is not just a day that we don't work or don't do the usual things, but we are being prepared, refreshed or renewed, so that the rest of the week we are able to distribute and sprinkle and spread care and kindness, loving kindness, goodness to the people that we meet in our lives. That's kingdom coming, kingdom building work. And so it's Sunday, but Monday is coming means Sunday we're getting ready for the real work of our lives, which is to brighten and better and increase the goodness of this world, as was part of Jesus' prayer. My third point has to do with caring, and it is this. 90% of caring is just showing up. There's a book by that title, and the important thing about that title is that it reminds everybody that to be a caring person, you don't have to be brilliant, you don't have to be educated, you don't have to be the greatest person in the world, But when you know that someone is hurting, or if you hear that someone is going through a tough time, it is your presence there that usually makes the biggest difference. You don't have to know how to say special things. You don't have to know how to quote scripture even. But that if you know that someone is hurting, or if you know someone's struggling, and if you go to them in some way, your presence communicates so much that is helpful and strengthening and reassuring and supportive, that what you say is secondary. Your just being there does so much. So if you can remember that little slogan, 90% of caring is just showing up, then you don't have to fear going into tough places. You don't have to discount yourself, but you can go and knock on the door or dial up somebody's number and say, hi, I've been thinking about you, concerned about you, heard you're going through a tough time. And most of the time, they will be so very, very helped and encouraged by your love that just shows up. Number 4 is related to it. I think I spoke about it before, where I shared this story of this man who was going through a bone marrow transplant. And he was in isolation, and he had to be kept away from people, and when people came, they had to be gowned up. And it was a very difficult, painful, and lonely time. But when he was asked, where's God? Where was God in that for you? He replied, God wasn't there until people who cared showed up. And that was a very powerful lesson that we all need to remember, that the Spirit of God really depends so much on coming through the loving kindness of people. Now we know that God is always there. We know that God was sustaining him and keeping him going. But the feeling and the realization, the actualization of God's presence depends on caring people who take the time and go into difficult places and just say, hello, we've been thinking about you. We love you. How are you doing? Connected with those 2 points is my 5th point, which is that amateurs are the best. If you took Latin or even some other language, Hispanic language, you will recognize that in the word amateur is the word amore, which means to love. And an amateur we sometimes regard as a secondary performer compared to the professionals. But if you look at the word amateur as being built around the word amore, to love, amateurs in the care business are the best, because amateurs do it for the love of it. Now, it's very important that we have professionals to help in the hard dilemmas of life and the challenges of life, but there aren't enough professionals. God depends on you and me as amateurs, people who have love in our hearts, who want to serve God, who are followers of Jesus, and we want to be to the world what God wants us to be, practitioners and deliverers of care and kindness. And so you may be an amateur, and that's the best, because amateurs do it for the love of it. My last point before we end this one is number 6, the importance of smiles and touch. Anybody can smile and anybody can touch. Now, sometimes we have to be careful who and where and when we touch people, and we even have to ask their permission. But it's a known fact that holding someone's hand, patting them on the back, sometimes just holding their arm, that physical touch is so meaningful and powerful and encouraging to the human spirit. And in addition to that, a simple smile that anybody can do communicates love and care and kindness and brightens the spirit. Practically every one of us has been healed and helped and encouraged by just a smile on someone's face. So these are 6 of the easy and possible notes that I wanted to share with you, and I have some more I'll do separately, about how to be a follower of Jesus who delivers care and kindness, loving kindness, every day of the week. That's what it means to be the light of the world. I'd like to start today by sharing with you a very powerful part of Scripture. It's from 1 John 4, verses 7 to 12. Here's the way it reads: "Let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. If God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. If we love one another, God abides in us." That's a shortened part of that scripture, but it is such a powerful thought that God is love, and that when we show love to people, it is evidence that God is in us, that God abides in us, says the Bible verse. So that's a very powerful incentive for us to be giving people loving kindness, because we're giving them God. And when we do so, we know that God is alive, working through us. One of the ideas that Jesus shared with us is that we should take up our cross and follow Him. And He said, for whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That idea of losing your life for Christ's sake, that is explained in other places as dying for others. Now that's the essence of what Jesus did for us. He died for us. And I'd like to remind you that whenever you do something for someone else that costs you something, maybe it makes you uncomfortable, or maybe it takes of your time or your energy, or you're not sure that you're able to do it very well. Whenever you put yourself out to help another person, to do good to them and for them, that is a form of dying for others. It's of the same species of Jesus dying for us, which is the major way that none of us can really repeat. But the Spirit of Jesus Christ is in us when we are able and willing to put ourselves out on someone else's behalf. And the interesting thing about that is when we do that for another person, so often it is life-giving to them. it lifts their spirits. It makes them feel better and builds their confidence. It restores them if they are depressed or unhappy. So by dying for others, if we can stay with that figure of speech, by giving them kindness, we are bringing them to life. It's a very fascinating idea, the way God works through us to give new life to others through our behavior, which takes the form of dying for others. And I think we've talked about it earlier, but dying for others may be just making yourself uncomfortable because you don't really feel confident about it, but you're going to do it anyway. Or you feel like you're rushed for time, but you do it anyway. Or maybe there's something else that you need to overcome, but you decide to do it. That's a form of dying for another person. And that's what we need to be active at in order to bring people life, to encourage them, to give zest for people's lives. Because in the process, we are really giving them the Spirit of God in the form of love. My 8th point is that God heals and that God is compassionate. So much of our caring does extend itself to people who are going through tough times, hard times, painful times. And often when we reach out to them, we enter their pain. We may almost literally share their anguish with them. Now, one of the important concepts, which I will say more about later, is to believe that it is God who is healing them. God's presence is with them. God's Spirit is lifting them up. God's love is holding them. And in the process, God is restoring them. One of the most powerful words that defines God in the Bible is the word compassion. Compassion means to feel with. And God is defined again and again as compassionate. And whatever you go through, whatever hard time you have, whatever loss or grief or disappointment, we know from God's story in the Bible that God feels for us. God is compassionate. One of the great events in all of history was the Exodus, when the people of Israel were delivered from slavery in Egypt. In the Bible, it tells us the people were crying and groaning, and they cried out to God, and they were very, very distressed and in pain and heartache and physical torment. And it says, and they cried out to God, and God heard them, and God delivered them. Now that's one of the most powerful examples, there are many of them in the Bible, of God hearing the cries of people and coming and responding and delivering them. And that happened to the Israelites, but it is also what God wants us to know whenever hard things come to us, that He feels with us, He feels for us. His heart aches for us when we go through difficulties. And He wants us to know that He is walking with us, and He is restoring us, and He is lifting us up. The 9th point that I want to share with you, and I've already said it, but to remind you that every act of support and encouragement and appreciation and kindness is giving people tastes of God. You you can go through life with that agenda in your heart and always have something meaningful to do in your life, whether it's at a store or a bank or a car wash or just in the neighborhood. You have the opportunity to give tastes of God to the people around you. And remember, my 10th point is this: you cannot tell by the way people look that they are hurting. There are certain people that are obviously in distress. They may be in a wheelchair or have other physical signs, but we are all the walking wounded. And so every person we meet is a candidate for a word of encouragement, a smile, appreciation, or some form where we give them a blessing. You know, a kind word goes in the air. Remember that? And it changes the blood chemistry so that you're actually feeling better when someone speaks kindness to you. So may God continue to help you, strengthen you, and enthuse your heart to be a deliverer of care and kindness. Thank you. I'd like to talk to you this morning about praying for and with other people. Practically everybody prays. This has been proven by certain research that has been done, and so that it's easy for us to talk about prayer, because practically everybody prays in some form, even if it's only silently crying out to God for help. So today I want to help you to think a little bit about praying for other people in their presence personally. It's one thing to pray for others, which we all do. We intercede for people who are sick or discouraged or in grief, but usually they're at a distance, and that's a wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful activity, and it's a wonderful help to people to know that they're being prayed for and to have the strength that comes through active prayer. But I'd like to encourage today the next step to help you to believe that praying with someone in their presence is something you can do. I like to say, somewhat facetiously, that if you can order a hamburger at the fast food drive-through, you can pray. Because praying is asking God for something that God can give you. When you meet someone who is going through a tough time, perhaps someone who's lost a spouse or lost a job or just has some illness in their life, the first thing that a caring person needs to do is to ask them how they're doing, to bring up the subject, to not avoid the topic, but to bring it up. Many widowed people will say to you, will tell us that people avoid their subject. They're thinking about their husband or their wife who has just passed away, and people won't talk to them about it. So the caring person who meets someone who's going through a tough time, first of all, is going to bring the subject up. The person will share with them how they are. They will talk about usually that it's not easy. And at that point is an opportunity for you to say, I'd like to pray for you. Would you mind if I pray for you? Or in some way you offer them a personal prayer. And they may say, sure. But they may think that you're going to do it at home. And then you may have to say, no, I mean right now. I'd like to pray for you right now. And usually people will accept it because it's such a wonderful gift. So when you pray for someone, first you ask their permission. Usually then you may want to take their hand. Reach out your own hand and take their hand, or both of their hands. And then you begin your prayer. Now let me step back a little bit before we go into that, because I'd like to tell you what I think is going on when you pray. For one thing, you're praying to God. And we tend to think of God up there, but God is really everywhere around us and in us and above us. But we're speaking to God and asking God for God's healing, helping, encouraging spirit to enter this person. Now when you do that, I believe God is also coming through you directly. God may come from whatever surrounds the person, but God also comes through you to the person. And so you are an instrument of healing to that person as you pray. And when you say to God, "Oh Lord, be with Joe. He is going through a very tough time. He's hurt, he's lonely, he's grieving, and he needs your assurance and your strength. He needs the your confidence that he will be all right." When you say that, you must believe that God is sending that into Joe, and that you are sending it into Joe. And that prayer is really activating healing in Joe. From God, and from God coming through you. There's a lot of evidence being gathered in the broader world about the power of prayer. There's one research project that was completed in a cardiac care unit in which the patients were divided into two groups, Group A and B. Group B received all the conventional care and prayer that every patient always received from their own pastors and their families and the conventional medical care. Group A was prayed for by prayer groups throughout the whole country. Each of these prayer groups had the names of these individual patients and a little bit about their conditions. And they focused on those people in their prayers. Now, amazingly, but wonderfully, when they studied the effects of prayer on the people of Group A, they found that their physical conditions were measurably helped by the prayers that were sent their way. They used less pain medication, fewer died, and they were admitted at an earlier time than Group B. So that was a research project that was very, very powerful in letting us know that prayer really has healing power. In my own experience, I had a time where one of my interns called me in the morning and said, "Our baby was born and he's going to die. He has a very serious problem and no babies do not recover from this." Well, in that day, I was one of dozens that just really prayed for this baby. His name was Chad. In the evening, the phone rang again, and my intern called and he said, Chad is remarkably well. He is going to live. Now that was one of the more stunning events in my life of prayer, because I really somehow just believed that it was prayer. He received all the usual medical care, but I just really believed that it was prayer that saved his life. And maybe you've had experiences like that too, and those just, they don't always happen, but they remind us that God is there, and God is coming through our prayers, lifting up, encouraging, healing, sometimes in very surprising ways, but always God is there, healing and helping and encouraging and lifting people up again. So I hope that you'll find a way to reach out to people personally and say, I'd like to pray for you right now, and reach out your hand or lay it on their shoulder and pray for them personally. They will be lifted up, and so will you. Thank you.